Welcome to Momversations. We are a nonprofit organization, and we want to welcome you to join us. So we're on the Win-Win Women's Network. We are so grateful for this platform and behind the scenes, making it all work smoothly so we women can gather together to care, to connect, and collaborate. Truly a win-win for us all. I am Leah Westover, your host, and I'm a mom of 8, plus 2 wonderful daughter-in-laws, 1 incredible son-in-law, and 5 amazing granddaughters. I am also co-founder of Momivate. We are a nonprofit organization that supports all women. Last week, we focused on relationship with God, and although we do not affiliate with just one religion, we welcome all. Momivate wants to empower you to elevate your mothering experience. We would like to invite you to join us on our website at momivate.org, where moms raise up society one family at a time. When you join us on our Momunity, we'll send you a free digital copy of our Smile Journal, where you can keep track of what you learned from each of these Momversation and set goals to impact your personal achievement based on the educational program. And Momivate is there to offer an opportunity for every mom to have an ENT assist her. Every mom needs education, money, and time. And our programs are designed to assist your journey. Right now, most of what we offer is online, but sometimes we have local events too, all of which you can hear about when you join our Momunity. So what do moms do anyway? Moms raise up society. That's right, not just our own kids, but all of society, including ourselves. This acronym is jam-packed with a far-reaching impact on intentional mothering. We develop relationships, we work on atmosphere, we deal with income and outgo, systems and schedules, energy. Sometimes we have unique circumstances and definitely putting energy and time into our personal pursuits. So today we're going to focus on relationships. And with those relationships, we're going to focus on with our husbands. So joining us today is Dr. Jennifer Finlayson-Fife. She's a relationship and sexuality educator and coach. Dr. Finlayson-Fife is a licensed clinical professional counselor with a PhD in counseling and psychology. Her dissertation was on LDS women and sexuality, which is the defining relationship with our husbands. She has 16 years of clinical experience and is joining us today from her home in Chicago. Thank you and welcome, Dr. Finlayson-Fife.
Thanks for having me.
So we're excited. So you thought a lot about this.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more. Why did you?
Well, so I always, even as a young person, I cared a lot about human behavior. I studied people around me a lot, but I cared especially about marriage relationships. And I didn't realize that it was unusual, but as a young person, I thought a lot about why some people were happily married and why so many people were not. Because I grew up in a faith community that really explicitly valued marriage, but I saw a lot of people around me who didn't seem very happy, and I was trying to figure it out. So when I went to school, I decided to study psychology, and then I decided I really wanted to become a counselor, and I entered into a PhD program, and it was time to write my dissertation. I was at Boston College, a Jesuit university, and I was asked to teach undergraduates about human sexuality. And so this really made me also start thinking about the ways in which we make sense of sexuality and why so many friends of mine who I wasn't yet married at that time, I was about to get married, but a lot of my friends were not having happy marriages. They were not having good sexual relationships. So I also really focused, I do a lot of my work on how to help people have happier marriages and happier intimate relationships as well. So, this was just kind of I don't know entirely why that was implanted in me, but I just always have cared about it. And so I do a lot of coaching and teaching, online instruction, podcasting. I even have a podcast where I'm working with couples to help them address the conflicts or the issues that are interfering with their happiness in their emotional relationship and in their sexual relationship. And so it's just a passion of mine that I care about. And I think in part because the quality of the marriage has so much impact on the whole family experience and how the kids experience home life. And so it's a very crucial relationship to do your best with.
Fantastic. I like how you use the word conflict. I've been married for 33 years with 8 children, and sometimes there's a lot of conflict in there, right?
Yes, sure.
And one of our principal talks about contact. And when you think about a marriage, that's usually the first thing. Oh, sexuality. And in some homes it's been taboo to talk about, right? What's the importance of that contact in a relationship?
Well, yeah. So I think that, right. And it depends a little bit on your upbringing, because if you grew up in a home in which you knew your parents liked each other and there was a strong, affectionate relationship, you have a sense that physical contact is a positive thing. If it was, on the other hand, though, taboo, or it was associated with evil or the potential to do a lot of harm, you can maybe be excited about the possibility of sexuality, but when you in fact are in an intimate partnership, there may be a lot more anxiety and uncertainty about being in an intimate relationship. And I mean both physically intimate, but also even emotionally intimate. I think a lot of times we think we want contact because we don't want to be alone in the world, but contact, whether sexual or emotional, has a lot more potential for friction and fear than we realize. Like, a lot of us want approval more than we want to be known. So we imagine, I want to get married and lock somebody in who will approve of me and tell me that I'm great. But I don't know if I necessarily want to be really known or let someone in on who I am. And that can be especially true around sexuality, because sexuality is so personal. It's so core to who we are. And it can feel frightening to really let someone in on this part of yourself, especially if you haven't come to peace with it yourself.
I like how you touched that, because as moms, we sometimes don't value who we are, right?
Yes.
And I think that's one of the places we start. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I think a lot of women are almost out of habit, relate to themselves as insufficient, as not quite making it. And then they often go and enter into the courageous work of full-time parenting. But parenting doesn't have a lot of opportunities for validation and approval. If you go and you work in a full-time career and you have a boss who's saying, great job on that project, and we're going to give you a pay increase, there's more opportunities for a kind of economic or official acknowledgement of the hard work you've been doing. And when you're mothering, a lot of times there's a lot of invalidation. If you're actually doing right by your child, a lot of times they're not happy with you when you're doing the right thing. And a lot of it's just thankless work. I mean, you're doing a lot of the same things over and over and over. So if you already are somewhat inclined to think harshly or to expect high, perfection, or expect high ideals from yourself, it can be easy to be highly aware of where you're failing. And that doesn't, how to say it, we are all, as human beings, as flawed human beings, as human beings in development, we are constantly imperfect. We are constantly doing things below what we might hope. But it can be hard to be accepting of that as being a fundamental part of being human. And it can also be hard to let your spouse in on that fact. And so you may want to keep your spouse happy or fulfill their needs, so to speak, but not necessarily want them to really, really know you if you struggle with a one down feeling. Mm-hmm.
So we kind of put up a barrier between ourselves and and that can affect us in our relationship
Yes.
with our husband.
Yes.
So how does one overcome that? How does, for example, and maybe this will answer my own question. My husband would come home after work after a long day and he'd start doing the dishes or different things. And I started feeling like I am a terrible wife and mother. I don't have this done. Until one day he walked in the door and I said, you know what? I did the best I could do. And if you want to do dishes, go ahead. And he's looking at me like, what's wrong with you? Right. But I had to give myself validation that I was doing my best.
Absolutely.
And how does one do that? Because that's not an easy thing to come to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think you have to challenge. It can be easy to fall into these habits of thinking, but they're not necessarily a representation of what is true or real. Like, in a sense, what you're saying somewhat defensively in that example, but you are saying like, I really did do the best I could today. And it didn't include getting to the dishes, which is not surprising, right? Like you have 8 children and that is so, it's just incomprehensible what that really entails to do that. But it is to kind of allow ourselves to judge ourselves more by bringing our best and tolerating all that isn't actually. You know, it's strange and even paradoxical sometimes that those of us that get the happiest in some ways are more able to handle that we have limitations, that we have limits on time, on that we can only prioritize some things, that we must say no to other things. And in some sense, the more we can handle who we are not, not needing to be everything for everyone, the more able we are to be at peace with ourselves. And some people think, oh, that means you'll just be sitting on the couch doing nothing if you start to accept yourself. But I've found the opposite is true, that if you can handle that, the reality that you can't say yes to everything, that you can't please everyone, that you can't do everything in the world, it actually frees you up in some ways to choose, what is my priority going to be? What am I going to make matter the most? And what will I tolerate that won't be as perfect as I might like it to be? And that actually allows us to have less perfectionistic demand on ourselves, less perfectionistic demand on our children, for there to be more room to be human and to allow the most important things to matter.
I love that. And to help that with our children and our marriage, some women may come into a relationship where their sexuality was damaged beforehand, or, to shelter themselves, right? What steps can a wife do to open up that honesty and be trusting of her spouse with something like that?
Yeah. Well, I think, especially if there's been some kind of abuse, it can be very hard, because I think the most typical response is to almost want to shut off sexuality as a way to protect oneself. It's kind of an instinctive response to say, I really want nothing to do with sex because sex makes me vulnerable. And I think, of course, every woman must make her own decision about how she's going to live in relationship to her body and her God-given sexuality. But something that I think has been helpful for many of my clients is the idea of reclaiming what always belonged to them, even if someone took it from them or invaded their privacy or disrespected their boundaries. That in some ways it gives that abusive person more power to shut your sexuality off altogether and reject this aspect of yourself as a way of rejecting the abuse. But another way to reject the abuse is to reclaim your sexuality as legitimately yours. And that doesn't mean that you have to rush into your marriage relationship and do whatever your spouse wants. That's not to claim your sexuality, but to say, this is my sexuality. It belongs to me. My body belongs to me. And I'm the driver. I'm in control of my own choices. And I think that sense of autonomy and control around sexuality of ourselves, I don't mean control of others, control of ourselves, is really, really important. And it's exactly what gets challenged in an abusive reality. So it's very important to be able to reclaim the sense that you're the driver of your life. You're the author of your life. You're the author of who you're going to be in your marriage. And being able to keep that sense of you decide. Now, you may choose to do things that are scary for you a little bit, like to open up more, to be more vulnerable, to show more of who you are. What helps is to remind yourself that you're the one who's going to make that decision. You're the one who's deciding to expose more of how you think, feel, what you desire. You're the one who would maybe address if there's something in the marriage that's interfering with your trust or interfering with your feeling of being loved by your spouse, that you're going to address that because you're worthy of addressing what you need or what's not working in the marriage for you in order to create a better marriage, in order to create a better sexual relationship. So I'm strongly encouraging my clients to not go into either rebellion, either compliance or defiance. Don't just go along with what your spouse wants. Don't just, fulfill his needs and check out. That's not going to be good for him or you. But don't be defiant either. Like, I'm shutting this all off. How can I step in as a partner, claim my sexuality, claim my ability to make choices in my life? And what is it that I want to create here in my marriage, in my life, that I can feel good about, that can accrue to my happiness and the happiness in the marriage? So it's more active and agentic.
I love that. I love it. You talked about conflict again. I mean, it's just kind of going into that conflict. That's kind of scary to go and to bring up something that is hard to talk about because it's going to ignite some kind of emotion.
Yeah, absolutely. Very hard. Mm-hmm.
But
and yet we can't get away from it. That's the thing. A lot of times we try to not talk about things, but then all the conflict just kind of goes underground and erodes the foundation of the marriage, erodes the sexual relationship because it's there in the form of resentment. So we often think of conflict as a negative thing, and contempt is, and, hostility is, but conflict's a natural part of an honest relationship. And it doesn't mean it has to get ugly, but to say, no, that's not working for me, or no, this is hard for me. That's actually a mechanism that helps two people grow up and create a real marriage. And so you can disagree and still be decent. You can say this is a problem, and it actually fosters the ability to create something stronger. But you want to keep track of, how am I approaching the conflict? How am I approaching the difference? Am I doing it with an eye to solve it? Am I giving information that will help us address this? Or am I doing it to kind of blame or excuse myself? Or am I just going silent and resenting? That's also destructive, even if it looks nice on the surface.
Yeah. And because of that relationship, your children feel it. And then they see the unhealthy relationship in there.
That's right. That's right.
And so with that, going through that emotion, you also talk about the value. We value ourselves and we reclaim our sexuality. We reclaim.
Yes.
And then making room. I think that's something you've talked about too, making room for your partner. What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I think a good, the thing, of course, that's different about a marriage than any other love relationship is that it is a partnership. And it's a partnership in which you're really working out a friendship between two different people, men and women. Part of the attraction is you're attracted to someone who's usually quite different from you and thinks differently than you. And that's very adaptive. That gives your children a range of skills in a mother and in a father. But it also creates lots of room for conflict because you are two different people who, maybe want different things or think about the world differently. And so part of growing is not resenting the fact that you married someone different than you, right? Like, I had guys that I dated who liked to talk about things just like a girlfriend would, right, with me, but I wasn't ever attracted to them. My husband, I was very attracted to. He's quiet, was much more introverted, and I just found him very compelling. But then when we got married, I wanted him to operate more like a girlfriend, talk about my feelings, blah, blah, blah. He was never going to be that guy. That's not who he was in the beginning. And the guys that were like that, I didn't find very compelling. So my point is that it's easy to resent or say, you should be like me. It's a very typical move. But to make room for your spouse and to make room for who they are is to say, no, I need to expand my heart and handle myself better, and not ask this person to just come in and reinforce me, or you have to come and speak my love language or anything like that. How do I actually love and know this person as he is? And I can also let him know and know me also, and let him know who I am. But the goal in marriage is not to necessarily put the other person's needs first or to erase your needs, but how do we work with our differences to create room for two people to thrive? How do we thrive both as a couple, as a friendship, and how do we thrive individually in our lives? Those are the happiest marriages, where you will sacrifice sometimes your more immediate comforts for the other person to be happy, and they do the same for you. But ultimately, you both thrive when you're willing and able to do that, both in the sexual realm and in the day-to-day of living and caring for each other and a family.
I love that, because I mean, 33 years of marriage, I've gone through ups and downs, and some of these things you're talking about is like, oh, I have to make room for this. That's important to you, right? And it's not important to me, but I can really see.
Yep.
And that makes a difference, that, so I really appreciate that, making room, even their differences, and accepting them. So
Yeah.
some of the other principles we talk about, is like forgiveness and compassion, trust. Those are really important in a marriage. Sometimes a spouse, loses our trust. How do we in a marriage rekindle that and find that trust again?
Yeah. So one of the things that I talk about, and it's see if I can be as efficient as I can about it, is it is important to make a distinction between trusting someone, forgiving them, and how to say it, stepping back in. Because if someone has broken your trust, that they've been in some way dishonest, deceptive, duplicitous, you you don't want to make the goal to trust them necessarily. What you want is to assess trustworthiness and to act accordingly, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So sometimes we want so much to trust, or we want so much to see our spouse as the person we hoped he or she would be, that we can go against our instincts or go blind to our spouse because we want so much to trust them. And that's not necessarily good.
Right.
On the other hand, I've worked with people where the spouse really has addressed their behavior, is being more trustworthy, is being more honest, is being more fair, but the spouse insists on staying skeptical and distrusting, not because if you really push them, they do track a more honest and trustworthy spouse, but they want to claim the safety of continuing to feel injured or continuing to feel untrusting, not because they're tracking a situation that is wary, is in need of their wariness, but because it gives them an excuse to not step into the marriage more deeply. So this is kind of my long way of saying, you want to be as honest with yourself as you can in assessing trustworthiness. And if it's not there, to stay in conversation about what you see and about what you track, and to keep looking for information that will help you understand what is happening. If you do track a spouse who's honest, who is straightforward, who is being fair, then you have to push yourself perhaps on your desire to keep skepticism as a kind of comfortable loophole in the marriage, a way out of stepping into it and trusting someone who is trustworthy.
That is awesome. And this half hour is just like flown by way too fast.
Yeah.
But just for those who know, we are going to finish this up here in 5 minutes, and we're going to take a stop this portion of it, and then we'll have a question and answer where we can talk. So let's go ahead, and will you just tell us really quick about your Finlayson-Fife.com, your Art of Desire?
Sure. So Finlayson-Fife.com, that's my last name, Finlayson-Fife. And so on my website, I have a lot of resources for helping people to address their emotional and sexual relationships. And some of that is their relationship to themselves. So I have a course called The Art of Desire, which is a course for women to develop a stronger sense of self. It addresses perfectionism, overcoming this sort of judgmental harshness, this need to keep everyone happy with us. And how do we become women who are more happy with ourselves in an honest way, who are developing our own gifts, our own capacities in a way that makes us more at peace with ourselves, better mothers, really, more able to love our children, but also more at peace with our sexuality, with our sensuality, with our desirability, and our ability to create a more intimate relationship with our spouse. So that's that course. And it's so it's a self and sexual development course that is self-paced and has also office hours where you can ask me questions about it, about any of the content.
That's awesome. So we encourage you all to go ahead, and if you're interested in more information, go to Finlayson-Fife.com. And we want to remind you to go ahead and write it down in your smile journal, what you learned today, and keep track and set a goal of what's your action, what do you want to do to improve your relationship with your husband. Hopefully you've taken something from today. And we want to thank you. This half hour has gone so fast. So we're a delightful time we've had you during this Momversation. Thank you, Dr. Finlayson-Fife, so much for joining us and sharing such valuable insight about our relationships with our husband. And thank you for joining us and gaining such valuable information.
Thank you.
So be again to join us next week, same time, same mom channel here on the Win-Win Women's Network. Our guest will be Shirley Griffiths from My Discovery Destination, helping us have better relationships with our children. And just remind you to empower and elevate your mothering experience. Join us at www.momivate.org. And if you would like to be a guest on our Momversation, you can apply on our guest by visiting the website. So just to finish up here, we got another minute or two. Do you have some topics you would like to finish up for another minute?
For me, anything to say?
Yeah.
Let me think. Well, I think something that can be helpful, I think it's really easy to feel like when we're having struggles in our marriage, that it's an indication that there's something wrong with us or wrong with the marriage, rather than the struggle in a relationship is fundamental to our growth as people. So a marriage exposes your limitations, and you can resent that exposure, or you can utilize it to see where you're limited and to keep growing. I think the more that you can actually normalize that process, the easier it is, or the better it is, because if you're working under some idea that there's something fundamentally flawed about us, I think that's a very unhelpful idea and just simply isn't true. Human beings, it takes time to learn how to share a life with someone. It takes time to learn how to really love another person. It takes time to learn to accept ourselves. There's some research that shows like women have the best sex in their 40s. Part of it is because women start to become more okay with themselves in their 40s. A friend of mine said, like, when I was in my 20s, I was always obsessed with what everybody thought about me. And then in my 30s, I kept trying to tell myself not to care what people think about me. And then by my 40s, I realized nobody was thinking about me anyway.
Reality.
Exactly.
Center stage.
So true. And so I think, a lot of times that in our 40s, we're starting to be more okay with just our human state in 50s, which I'm in now. It's even better. It's even easier to kind of just realize, we're all in this together. We're all very human. We're flawed. We're limited, but that is okay. And just allowing ourselves to keep learning, keep taking another step at a time. That's what helps us be better people, better parents, and better partners.
Fantastic. Again, thank you again, and we'll see you in just a second.
Great.